Today I'm going to discuss WMIS 2015, which is the new global harmonized system for WMIS. I'm sure you're familiar with WMIS. It's been around since 1988, and it's designed to protect workers from exposure to hazardous materials. WMIS 2015 is a global harmonized system, and one of the things that happened with WMIS was that it was an exclusively Canadian strategy. And for those of us in the business who work with various companies that import products from around the world, these companies had to comply with the WMIS standards for both material safety data sheets and labeling in order to get the product on the shelf in Canada. With the global harmonized system, everybody's following the same rules. The main trading partners are following the same rules. And so the implementation is going to go over a period of time until the mid-2018, where both manufacturers and workers will all have to comply. The other thing I'm going to talk about is fall protection, and I'm sure you've all heard about the working at heights, the commercials that have been on the air, and there's a lot of confusion between what's fall protection and what's working at heights. So I'm going to try and clear that up. These are programs that Davis Training runs on a regular basis. We have a training center right down here in North York at the Western Road and Steeles. We also do training on-site for customers. We do online training. We do webinar training. And our training methods are a little bit unique. I'm sure you have workers that are from various countries around the world. And sometimes training in English can be a challenge. We do train in English, but what we've learned over our 20 years in business is that when a person comes to Canada, first thing they do is learn to speak the language, then they learn to read the language, then they learn to write the language. And that transition takes quite a bit of time. So we've taken a lot of the reading and writing out of the process of training. We use the electronic keypads where the trainer will go through a segment of the training program, and then they will bring questions up on the screen, and they will read the questions because we know that most people can understand the language, and then they will simply ask them to punch a number on a keypad to answer the question. And we've had a great deal of success with this strategy, particularly for people with English with a second language. Just to go through, here we go, the basics of WMIS. It's an acronym for Workplace Hazardous Materials Information System, and it comes down to, in legal terms for workers in the Occupational Health and Safety Act, it's the right to know. And workers that are working with chemicals have a right to know how dangerous it is, what it can do to them, and how they can protect themselves. The purpose of WMIS is to provide information about hazardous materials used in the workplace to ensure the process of hazardous identification in the workplace is ongoing, and to ensure consistency of hazard identification in all workplaces across Canada. And so a worker that takes WMIS training the basics of the training will be good in any workplace that they go to because the labeling is consistent, the STS sheets are consistent, and the symbolism is consistent. What are hazardous materials? Well, they're biological or chemical agents named in the regulation as hazardous material. All hazardous materials are identified and regulated on the federal level. So it's important to realize that this is not an Ontario thing. It's a federal law that much like healthcare, where the federal government sets the standard and it's up to the provinces to pick up that standard and apply it to their own provinces. The provinces have varying degrees of industries. Out west, you get into more mining and forestry and whatnot. In Ontario, we're manufacturing-based and service-based. Why was it developed? To provide information to workers, to inform the general public about the chemicals companies are using in their area, to prevent accidents, and to aid emergency services, such as the fire department. And so there are strict standards if you are warehousing, like Warren is, to be able to identify where flammable materials are being stored. In case there's a fire here and the fire department rushes in, they want to know what's going to explode and what's going to catch fire quickly, and what they can avoid. In the Occupational Health and Safety Act, GHS is the global harmonized system. It's an international initiative to standardize chemical hazard classification and communications globally. So all of our trading partners are using the same system. GHS has been adopted by Canada's trading partners, including the United States. WHMIS is a national hazard communication system that provides information on the safe use of hazardous products in Canadian workplaces. GHS has not replaced WHMIS. WHMIS 2015 has incorporated GHS elements, resulting in new standardized classification criteria, label requirements, safety data sheets requirements, and formerly the material safety data sheets. The transition: employers are required to educate and train workers about WHMIS 2015 as new labels and SDS's sheets appear in their workplaces. During the transition period, employers may continue to use WHMIS 1988 labels and MSDSs in the workplace. If so, they must also continue to educate workers about WHMIS 1988. Employees must review and comply with WHMIS requirements of their occupational health jurisdiction. So it's important to know that if you send your workers out for WHMIS training, that's only part of the job. The safe use of specific chemicals should be trained as a hands-on training program and should be reviewed as often as necessary. Here's how the transition looks. Phase 1 is from February 11th, 2015 to May 31st, 2017. Manufacturers and distributors will start transforming into the WHMIS 2015 system. And distributors the same, and employers will have to consult their local regulator. Phase 2 from June 1st, 1917 to May 31st, 1918. All suppliers must have complied with WHMIS 2018. Distributors would be using either 1988 or WHMIS 2015, and an employer would be using either or. From June 1st, 2018 to November 30th, 2018, all suppliers must comply with WHMIS 2015, and all distributors must comply with WHMIS 2015. Employers, however, can still be using 1988 because they will be exhausting their current inventory. On completion, by December 1st, 2018, distributors, manufacturers, and employers must all be compliant with WHMIS 2018. So by the end of next year, you may still have some old labels in your products, so sometimes chemicals hang around for quite a while. But in terms of training and anything new that you receive, it should be compliant with WHMIS 2015. Roles and responsibilities and duties. The current roles and responsibilities and duties of suppliers, employers, and workers remain the same and unchanged for WHMIS 2015. You have to train your workers. You have to make them aware. The last thing you want to do is find yourself in a situation where you've had an incident where somebody has been overexposed or been burned by a chemical, and the Ministry of Labor comes in and says, when was the last time you did training? When was the last time you did a review on this specific product? If you don't have a good answer, then you're liable for a fine or other charges. The duties of employers: prescribe, provide, and maintain personal safety equipment. If personal safety equipment is required for the workers, it's up to the employer to provide it. Provide information, instruction, and supervision. As I said earlier, the basic WMIS training teaches them what to look for, but in terms of hands-on use for your application, it's your responsibility as an employer to make sure that they have that hands-on training. Take every reasonable precaution to ensure safety and to acquaint workers with any new hazards in the workplace. You are also responsible for your inventory, to assess your inventory, workplace labels. If you've got a chemical that's being transferred from one container to another, you must have a workplace label on the new container. Maintaining your MSDS or SDS sheets, and worker education. Inventory storage: an employer must maintain accurate inventory levels. Floor plans must be maintained. Material safety data sheets, or SDS, must be replaced every 3 years. For the new SDS, they are required to be updated when the supplier becomes aware of any significant new data. The training requirements under the Occupational Health and Safety Act: in addition to providing information instruction to a worker as required in the Clause 25 of the Occupational Health and Safety Act, an employer shall ensure that a worker is exposed to or likely to be exposed to a hazardous materials or to a hazardous physical agent receives instruction, and the worker participates in such instruction and the training as prescribed. Review: so how often do you have to do WMIS training? An employer shall review in consultation with the committee or the health and safety representative the training and instruction provided to a worker and the worker's familiarity herewith at least annually. Now, this is controlled by your safety committee or your safety representative. So your safety committee can review the current safety training and look at any incidents that may have occurred in your workplace and recommend either further training or more in-depth training or a simple review of the training. We're talking about fall protection. We're working with two different regulations when it comes to fall protection, and your company could fall into either. One is in construction-based, and the other is industrial-based. The construction regulation simply says employers using fall protection equipment are trained and the records of training are maintained. And there's a whole list of situations that would require fall protection on a construction site. Falling from more than 3 meters. So that could be ladder safety, a 10-foot ladder. Falling more than 1.2 meters if the work area is used as a path for a wheelbarrow or similar equipment. Falling into operating machinery. Falling into water or another liquid. Falling into or onto hazardous substances or an object, and falling through an opening or a work surface. From an industrial standpoint, where a worker is exposed to a hazard of falling more than 3 meters or 10 feet, the worker must wear a safety belt or harness to prevent from free falling a vertical distance of 1.5 meters or 5 feet. We're dealing with the latest thing that the government has come up with is working at heights. And working at heights is a construction situation, and it falls under Regulation 297. And the requirements of Section 7 apply to an employer with respect to workers who are required under Ontario Regulation 213 for construction projects to use any of the following methods of fall protection: a travel restraint, a fall protection, fall restriction system, a fall arrest system, a safety net, a work belt, or a safety belt. And so the distinction of construction being erecting and fixing things on a construction level. There is a definition for it. Construction includes the erection, alteration, repair, dismantling, demolition, structural maintenance, painting, land clearing, earth moving, grading, excavating, trenching, digging, boring, drilling, blasting, or concreting, the installation of any machinery or plant, and any work or undertaking in connection with a project, but does not include any work undertaking underground in a mine. So the big confusion is do I need working at heights or do I just need fall protection? The simple answer is working heights was made for construction. What it's designed to do is to stop people from falling off buildings while they're being constructed. If you're working inside, if you're cleaning inside, running comm cable, changing light bulbs, erecting shelving, or doing anything like that, using ladders, scaffolding, using scissor lifts, things of that nature, you're into fall protection. If you're outside working on construction and you're going up where the walls aren't up yet, then you're into working at heights. Working at heights is largely about barriers and recognizing fall hazards. Now, if you're working for a large construction company, they may insist that you take working at heights. And that's not necessarily for your protection as much as it is for their protection. If you're a major contractor and you're responsible for a large number of subcontractors, you want to set some rules that protect you from anything that might happen to them. And I have clients that lay carpet. So this is the last thing that goes into a new building is the carpet. They have to have working at heights. I've got companies that make switches, like the main electrical switch that sits on the ground out in front or behind the building or beside the building. Because it's a construction site, they have to have working at heights, even though they're not going to work more than 5 feet off the ground. So you may find yourself in a situation like that where working at heights is insisted by the person that owns the project. There's an amendment to the construction regulation, and it deals with suspended platforms. And it brings in a whole new set of regulations for the people that are using suspended platforms to clean windows, to do refacing of a building, sandblasting, and things like that. And this is where the platform is affixed from the roof and is allowed to move up and down on ropes, okay? Or a boatswain's chair. The training that required includes notifications to the MOL before you even start, equipment requirements and design standards. These are all new CSA standards that one must comply with before even beginning work. Barriers and warning signs that must be up. PSR tests. So PSR means pre-start health and safety review. So there's a set of standards for this type of equipment and a routine engineering report that has to go along with that piece of equipment before it is put into use. Inspecting and testing procedures, these are done daily as the equipment is being used. And then worker training. The workers have a whole training program that they have to go through in order to be up on that type of equipment. It's very comprehensive. I have several clients that do restoration work on a routine basis. They had to send out 200 guys to get this done before they could start work again. Training requirements for fall protection. First thing you're going to learn is legislation. Then we go over ladder safety, which seems so simple, but there's several different types of ladders, and they all have specific uses. Like an extension ladder is not to be used the same way as a self-supporting ladder. Aerial lift platforms, scissor lifts, bucket lifts, protective covers and guardrails. to protect holes in the floors, guardrail technology, and guardrail standards. Protection from falling objects, safety helmets, side impact, overhead impact, overhead hazards, things falling from heights, fall protection equipment, belts, harnesses, lanyards, and whatnot. Fall protection systems, there's different types of systems to protect from different types of falls. You may want to restrict yourself from falling as opposed to allowing yourself to fall only a certain distance. And so you have travel restriction and you have travel restraints. Fall arrest systems, safety nets, and then fall arrest precautions. These are all the things that are covered in standard fall protection training. Working at heights training is very similar. The legislation, of course, is discussed, rights and responsibilities under the Occupational Health and Safety Act. This deals with the responsibilities of the constructor or the owner of the project, the kind of barriers that they are responsible for having up. And so as a worker, before you go up there, you have the knowledge to know and recognize the kind of barriers that should be up, and if they're not up, then you have the right to refuse work. Identification of working height hazards, how to identify weaker structures, improperly erected barriers, and whatnot. Eliminating and controlling hazards from working at heights, assessing whether or not you actually have to work at heights, or could that kind of work be done on the ground. Warning methods and barriers, ladders and equipment, and fall protection equipment. Barriers and other fixed equipment, personal fall protection, the type of harness and the standard of harness that you should be wearing. Anchor points. What's a good anchor point? How do you assess an anchor point? What should be the strength and capacity of an anchor point? And work access equipment and platforms, and of course rescue planning. Before any worker goes up into a situation where they could be in trouble, there should be a rescue plan in place that worker has the right to review and assess before they go up and do the work. In the suspended work platform training, the regulations under the Act that apply to the work are fall hazards, selecting and putting on and using and inspecting personal protective equipment, identifying using fixed supports, the components, functions, and limitations of supports, reading and using floor plans and work plans, load limitations of the suspended work platform, and elements of emergency and rescue.